All right, we have Jimmy back on the channel. Great to have you, man. How are you?
Dude, I'm glad to be here. I love getting to hang out with you and learning a bunch. I've been learning a lot lately from Collaborate Worship. I just want to say that. So I appreciate all that you do, and thanks for having me on here.
Awesome, man. Well, if you don't know Jimmy, go hop on, search YouTube for Hey Worship Leader, and you'll find all Jimmy's great content there. But in this video, we're going to talk about the best guitar tone and EQ, because the electric guitar is all about the tone, right? And as a sound guy, I love it whenever the guitar player gives me that tone that's on point, where I really don't even have to do anything to it. So can you tell us what's the first step in getting to that great tone?
Well, one thing, yes, tone is it's like everybody's after the tone, and it can change from week to week. But, the best thing to do to get good guitar tone in a live experience. See, this is my biggest thing is like people have an amp and a pedal board, and guitar players are a certain way. We can be divas, I guess, about this. And we're like tone divas. We've crafted it. But in my experience, and if I did this, I know other people will do this. They have their amp in their room, perhaps in an apartment or a quiet place, and they've really dialed in their sounds when the amp is really low. And so that's the first problem. And so then they get their live and like, oh, I can put it in a box or, whatever they're doing to it, and they crank it, and then the sounds just change completely. So that's like one thing. And then the other thing is like just showing up live, just the challenge of showing up live. Like I use modelers like the HX Stomp and the Helix, and I'm crafting, I just started with in-ear monitors, trying to craft my tone through there using the headphone out, which is not even the same out as the out that I send to church. So already we have a headphone amp, preamp or whatever, giving us a different signal. And then now I dial in with my studio monitors. So the biggest challenge is, okay, it sounds great in my house. Then I get there and it's just dead sounding. And so my first tip that I usually say right out the gate is like, it sounds change from room to room. And so try to monitor your sound when you're crafting your tone through as many different monitors as you can. One of them being, if you are serving at a church regularly, like see if you can build the relationship with the sound guy. So that's like the first thing I say. Like you want to build that relationship because you want good tone, but the sound guy wants good tone. You just said it. Like you want to receive the best tone possible. So you guys are on the same page. The second thing is the sound guy is not as concerned as much as we are with all the little intricacies. And so know that going into it, like you just hold that, just send them a good signal. And so if you can get in early or like just go to your sound guy and say, hey, I've been working on some tones, but I don't have any idea. And like bring them along. I don't know as a sound guy if you would ever want to hear that, but at my church, that's what I do. They know I make presets, so I'm like, hey, I need to check this out. And I say, when I use the modelers, I'm like, hey, give me a flat EQ first, and then tell me what you would have to do to it so that next time you don't have to do as much. So I want to try to give them the best tone possible. So, that's kind of the start. That's without getting into like effects pedals and all that stuff. It's like work with your sound guy, bring them along, build that relationship and say, what do you have to do to my tone to make it usable? And I will try to work on that.
So you disarmed a pretty big argument that's probably happening between guitar players and sound guys by just saying that, hey, your guitar tone sounds different at church than it did in your studio monitors or in your headphones. Because I have guitar players show up, they've worked on their guitar tone at home for hours. They plug it in and it does not sound good. And so it's good for a sound guy to know that. So whenever you have to address it, you say, hey, I know you worked on this and I think we're almost there, right? But there's some changes that need to be made for it to sound good here in this room, and then just have that conversation with them.
Yeah. So if I were, we're on your channel here. If you're mainly, coming from a guitarist perspective, I try to challenge the guitar players to do that. But even from a sound guy, bridge that gap, knowing that you're dealing with a diva probably. Try to bridge that gap as best you can and bring them along. Say, hey, here's what I'm having to do to your tone. And maybe do that one-on-one. I know how embarrassing it is when someone's over the mic. It's during rehearsal and like, hey, your tone is horrible. Can you fix it? There's communication skills just sometimes go right out the door. And so that's got to be the first step, just bringing each other along because you both want the same thing.
Yep, that makes this video totally worth it. If you just get that, you're on a great path there. I've got a few more questions for you. What are the essential pedals and effects that you need to get great guitar tone? Like I'm talking about if you had to narrow it down to just a few, like what would they be?
Yeah, so we're in the worship world, but just to start off, I started off with a Blues Junior amp that the reverb didn't work on it and could be noisy at times because it fell out of the back of a tour van several times, and then I just had a tuner and an overdrive, and I played that way for 3 years, and with a keyboard and all that stuff. I mean, it was super simple, and I was able to play. Now, did it sound good? I don't know. I mean, but I think it did. The tone was there, but all that to say, and I've said it, we can be guitar tone divas. And so we think we need all this stuff. And I'm about to build a big pedal board. It's fun. We love it. We need all the effects. But the first step is of getting good guitar tone starts with the amp before you mess with all these pedals. And we get distracted very easily with all the fun toys. So whether it's an amp, a real life amp, or it's an amp in the modeler, I mean, I just put out a video 2 days ago and was like, hey, let's build a preset together. And half the video was just setting up the amp and the cab and getting all that squared away, because you can't slap effects on a bad sounding amp and expect magic to happen. It's just gonna, it's cumulative. It's just gonna sound bad. So that's the first step. And then from there, we have all the fun pedals. And I'm not saying don't get those. I'm just saying make sure you pay attention to your tone at the core level first. The next thing I would get is probably a delay. A delay pedal is next, because you want that, even without, I would have said reverb first, but I'm changing and just say, cause a lot of times delay is the part, we were playing parts of songs either that are our own songs or they've songs that's already been written. And, sometimes it's the part that you're playing, and then sometimes it's the tone that is also the part, because there's a certain delay pattern or a certain overdrive sound that comes with that. And so even maybe before an overdrive, I would use my amp and then use my volume knob on my guitar to back off to get multiple tones, and my pickup selector, and maybe get a delay pedal first so you can play those parts the way you hear them. Because if you're playing a dotted eighth part and you don't have a delay, then half of that part is missing. And then from there, I would probably get an overdrive, maybe some compression. Yeah. So those are some of the first essential things.
Awesome, man. Well, let's dive into some EQ tips. Like, is there EQ that you find yourself using over and over to achieve great guitar tone?
I would say just get an EQ pedal, and I've really been on an EQ kick, and I didn't even tell you that lately. I just love EQ, probably because I have the Pod Go. That's the course I have, is on the Pod Go. I make presets for it, and the way it's set up is that there are certain blocks in there that you can't get rid of. You can customize and move them around, and one of them is an EQ block. And a lot of people are like, what do I do with this EQ pedal? One of the things I like doing with it, since I'm stuck with it, is using it before my amp and cab to use it as like another overdrive. So that's one thing you can do with EQ, is use it before your amp and cab to send tone into your amp to create whatever tone you want. So say and it's perfect for solving like live issues. So like if you want your overdrives, you kick it on, it's just not sounding right. Well, an EQ pedal, you can actually go in, if it's a 10 band or 6 band, whatever EQ there is, and you can bump up certain frequencies to shape the tone that you want as an overdrive. The same thing is true if you use it after your amp. This will not change the sound of your amp now. You'll just be changing the signal coming out of your amp, not before your amp, if that makes sense. When you use it before your amp, you're using it like an overdrive. If you crank the level, it's acting like as a boost. You're pushing gain into your amp. So it's not really, it will affect your overall volume, but it's not as much because it's coming before the amp. The amp's just absorbing all that new information and changing the sound before it spits out. But if you use an EQ pedal after your amp and cab, then you're just taking your amp sound and amplifying it, and amplifying certain frequencies. And so that's another good thing for playing live. If they're like, man, your whole amp, everything is mid scooped, we need some more mids to punch through the mix. Well, man, you can push up the 750 to 1200 or whatever is needed in that moment, and push it up there. And that'll give you that quickly. So if you use it in a modeler or just another pedal, I have a cheap one that someone sent me. I think Sonic Cake. I say cheap, it's a budget, inexpensive pedal, and it works great. So, and I've seen people use like the Donner EQ pedals. An EQ pedal is an EQ pedal if it works right. The only problem is that sometimes the numbers don't line up to reality. They may say it's 750K, but it's not the same 750K on another pedal. That might be some of the issues you run up against with some of the cheaper ones, but they all work.
Awesome, man. So if your sound guy said, "Hey, Jimmy, your guitar is sounding too harsh and it's really fighting with the vocals," what kind of adjustment would you make on your end?
Yeah, so I would apply like a high cut or a low pass filter over the top. So if it's too harsh, and in the modeling world, I don't know who we're speaking to here, but you know, a lot more people are going to modeling. That's kind of the biggest complaint, is that sometimes there's like this digital harshness that can happen with some of the modelers, and it depends on, not every amp in there and cabs are created equal. And so, yes, I apply sometimes a pretty heavy amount of a high cut, depending on what's needed, depending on what guitar pickups I have. If I'm playing a telly, it's already really bright. I'm playing through a bright amp and it's just ice picky, man, I will just take the high cut and roll it down as far as I can without it getting muddy. And so that can be different because the numbers are all different. You know, in the Helix, sometimes it can go down to like 3,000, 3K or whatever. I can back it all the way and still have a nice beefy tone without it losing that top end clarity.
Nice, man. So this last Sunday, I was listening and noticed that this low mid area was missing in the mix. And so I was listening to what our electric guitar player was playing and what was in the backing tracks and things like that, and realized that our guitar player was hanging out in this upper mid range doing some fun stuff, but there was nobody filling it. Like I just needed some chunky guitar chords to fill in that space. So I just wanted to mention that because sometimes it's all about like what you're playing, not necessarily the guitar tone.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, I have a good relationship with our main sound, our production lead guy, because he's also a guitar player. So he understands that world as well, and he'll just be honest sometimes and say, "Hey, it sounds great," you know, building that bridge, and then he'll say, "Here's what we're missing." You know, like you said, the piano and the lead guitar are playing pretty much the same thing, and it sounds great, but we're missing this whole end. And if there's that relationship with the worship leader, like, "Hey, yeah, let's adjust," because again, it's not the part that you practice that's the end goal. It's the sound that's the end goal. So hopefully team members are willing to serve the song, you know, the most. And if you've built that relationship, yeah, sometimes it's not the tone that's being given, because, you know, when you've taken church sound made simple and you can adjust for a little bit of irregularity, sometimes it's just what they're playing for sure, and they need to know what. I usually use the fraction principle when I'm teaching this. So let's say you have 7 people in your band, you're kind of responsible for 1/7 of the sound, and you need to find what area you need to fit in. Now, sometimes like guitar, you're pretty much either in a couple ranges. You can be really high, especially if you have a pitch effect on and get some shimmery sounds, or you're doing that lower chord stuff. But like keyboard players and those who have the full spectrum of sound at their fingertips, you really got to teach them about, okay, we have a bass player today, so you don't have to play those bass notes, and the lead guitar player is playing here and the vocals are here. So really teaching them how to fit in a sound can be, take up their space can be a challenge. But for guitar players, know your role and what's needed and stay in that lane.
Yeah, and it's like you're pro level if you can listen yourself as a guitar player, and you don't only have yourself in your in-ears, right? You're actually listening to what the band's playing, and you recognize, hey, there's something missing here, and you just jump down there and take care of it, right?
Yeah.
That's like a pro musician right there.
That's right.
Yep.
They're serving the song, and that's what a pro musician does. They're not just showing up to practice the parts. And it may be different than what was happening on the album. You know, we use that as a base, like, hey, let's play the song like it was written. But then sometimes we need to change it. Even drummers or something, you know, like, hey, they had this big arena. We're playing in a it's just different here. So let's add this. And if someone says, well, that's not how it is on the album, like, well, we're going to serve the song for this room today, you know? But yeah.
Yep. Fun conversations. Well, man, you've created a fast track to great guitar tone. Like, you put in the heavy lifting and created some great presets, even though you've already mentioned that, well, this might have been in the other video that we did actually, but like, even though you have this preset, you may need to make some adjustments when you get it into your room, because hey, it's your room after all, and every room's different. But you gave a good head start with these presets. So tell us about those.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned the course for the Pod Go, but I make presets for all the Line 6 stuff that's Helix and newer. I know Line 6 has some older units, but for the Helix, the HX Stomp, very popular pedals, they're very accessible for people. And so I make presets for those that just gives you a good starting point. I've dialed in those amps. I've even made some custom IRs so that you're not hearing that ice picky stuff that can come with some of the that can come with some of the stock cabs, but there's a lot you can do with stock cabs. And I've also done that. I've dialed them in, kind of dial out and I mess with that guitar and that guitar, all the guitars I have at my disposal with all the different pickups and like, okay. And sometimes I even have like a switch, like the one preset, humbucker on, humbucker off, single coil on, just so I can use EQ to like, well, this is what makes the different guitars sound the best. So my most popular thing is the Expanse pack. It's an ever growing collection of presets, kind of like a subscription, but it's not. You just pay once and you get updates for life. So you can find that at heyworshipleader.com or a link below.
That's awesome, man. And if you're wondering, like, is it worth it? I mean, 100% is worth it. Because, yeah, you're paying for these presets, but imagine the time that you're saving. So go get those. heyworshipleader.com, right?
Appreciate that. Yep, heyworshipleader.com.